On April 1st, 1976, the Central of New Jersey and the Lehigh Valley Railroads were consolidated with the Penn Central, Erie-Lackawanna, and other smaller eastern railroads into the government-financed Consolidated Rail Corporation, which became known as Conrail. The goal of Conrail was simple in concept but difficult to achieve. Its purpose was to support the existing bankrupt Eastern rail operations until a restructured, profitable private sector rail system could evolve. In spite of the numerous, almost insurmountable obstacles faced, Conrail's management slowly succeeded in developing a new rail map of the northeastern section of the nation. Conrail was credited with saving northeastern rail transportation. However, in doing so, it eliminated railroads and motive power that had been fan favorites. Sadly, from a rail fan's perspective, many of the first-generation diesels, particularly from the smaller builders, were quickly removed from Conrail's roster. At takeover, Conrail became the owner of just over 4,800 diesels, many suffering from lack of maintenance. The situation was so critical that Conrail was forced to lease locomotives to eliminate power shortages. Over time, with the elimination of parallel service and branch lines, fewer locomotives were needed. As would be expected, economic progress necessitated the elimination of non-productive locomotives, and the oldest, least efficient diesels were eliminated, not unlike how the diesel replaced the steam engine a generation earlier. Rail fans found it more and more difficult to find a first-generation diesel on a freight or at the head end of one of the remaining passenger trains. Fan-favorite cab units, road switchers, and yard engines from Electromotive, Elko, Baldwin, Lima, and Fairbanks Morris were disappearing. The authors of this DVD were among the many rail fans that traveled throughout the Northeast filming and photographing these locomotives before they were gone. Those were sad but exciting times as we searched for what we like to call the last of the first. The goal of this DVD is to present a survey of the diesel rosters of two of the railroads that were included in the Conrail system, the Lehigh Valley and the Central Railroad of New Jersey, looking not only at their first-generation locomotives, but also the new, more powerful second-generation diesels acquired before the Conrail takeover. The Lehigh Valley and Central Railroad of New Jersey, which became known as the Jersey Central, have been grouped together because they shared a common history and geography. In the 1860s, the Lehigh Valley and the Jersey Central were principal connections to each other. The Jersey Central extended west only to Easton, Pennsylvania, where it interchanged with the east end of the Lehigh Valley. The main traffic was anthracite coal, which originated on the Lehigh Valley and moved to the New York urban area via the Jersey Central. This cooperative arrangement terminated in 1871 when the Jersey Central entered the coal-producing regions through the lease of the Easton and Western, a parallel competitor of the Lehigh Valley. In response, the Lehigh Valley built its own line parallel to the Jersey Central into Jersey City, resulting in virtually side-by-side trackage from Scranton, Pennsylvania to Jersey City. Rail historians suggest that had they evolved as a single railroad, throughout their histories they would have been a more financially secure railroad. This concept becomes clear when looking at a map of the Lehigh Valley and Jersey Central. Together, they would have provided a direct connection between the urban areas to the East Coast and Buffalo, New York, gateway to the Great Lakes Mississippi River system. We will begin our survey with the locomotives of the Lehigh Valley Railroad. The Lehigh Valley was a colorful railroad during the diesel era, utilizing at least 7 distinct paint schemes. The number of variations increases when shades of red are considered. At least 3 were used: Cornell, Tuscan, and a bright red that was not named. At least 5 of the paint schemes can be seen in this May of 1974 photograph taken at the Sayre, Pennsylvania yard. These Alco FA cab units are wearing the original as-delivered paint scheme, cornell red with 3 black stripes. The Yellow Jacket paint scheme appeared in 1964 with the delivery of Alco Century 420s. These locomotives were the only units to receive this paint scheme. Alco Century 628s, purchased new and acquired second-hand from the Monon, were the only units to wear the black and white paint scheme, which became known as Snowbird. The first repaints received a deep red with a small yellow stripe and small Lehigh Valley printed on the side. 2 units, GP9 number 301 and RS3 number 216, were repainted deep red with a broad yellow stripe containing a large Lehigh Valley. They were the only 2 diesels to receive this paint scheme. Alco Century 420 number 406 is wearing the next paint scheme, which featured a narrow yellow stripe with a large Lehigh Valley and white stripes painted on the short hood. The last paint scheme was similar to the previous one, except the pilot and nose stripes were black and white. Lehigh Valley's GP38-2s and U23Bs were delivered in this paint scheme. We will begin our detailed review of Lehigh Valley diesels with units assigned to yard operations. These will be followed by over-the-road units and locomotives assigned to passenger operations. As was the case with most railroads, Lehigh Valley's first diesels were purchased for yard switching. The roster included in-cab yard switchers from the American Locomotive Company known as Alco, the Baldwin Locomotive Works, and Electromotive. The first yard switcher was a 600 horsepower high hood unit from Alco, identified as an HH600. It joined the roster in 1932. 5 years passed before the next diesel purchase. In 1937 and 38, 6 Electromotive SW type 600 horsepower and 11 900 horsepower NW1s were delivered. These were followed by 4 Electromotive SW1s in 1939 and 40, and 2 additional SW1s following World War II in 1950. In 1942, the first of 16 Alco S2 type 1,000 horsepower switchers were delivered. The final unit arrived in 1949. 5 1,000 horsepower Baldwin VO 1000 switchers were acquired in 1944. In 1949, the Lehigh Valley received 7 1,000 horsepower Electromotive updated NW2s. 9 Baldwin DS4 1000 switchers were purchased between 1949 and 1950. Also purchased in 1950 were 14 Baldwin S12 1200 horsepower switchers. In addition to the Baldwins in 1950, a single Alco S1 type 660 horsepower locomotive joined the roster. Also in 1950, 5 1200 horsepower Electromotive SW7s were added to the roster. 27 Electromotive 800 horsepower SW8s were added to the roster between 1950 and 1952. And 13 1200 horsepower Electromotive SW9s were delivered in 1951. 2 additional Alco's upgraded S4 types were purchased in 1951. As shown in yellow on the chart, between 1955 and 1960, Electromotive rebuilt 12 SW and NW1 yard switchers. The rebuilt locomotives were identified as SW900Ms, rated at 600 horsepower. And in 1953, 2 NW1s were rebuilt into SW8s. The detailed review of the Lehigh Valley in-cab yard switchers will begin with the Electromotive SW1. The 600 horsepower SW1 was one of the most popular end-cab yard switchers produced by Locomotive. 660 were built between 1939 and 1953. The Lehigh Valley owned 6 SW1s, numbered 112 through 115, and number 118 and 119. SW1 number 112 is seen in Sayre, Pennsylvania in October of 1972. In this photograph and following film clip, we see SW1 number 115. The photograph was taken in Mansville, New Jersey in May of 1972. The film was shot in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. In October of 1949, Locomotive began producing the upgraded SW7, which was the yard switcher with 1,200 horsepower. The Lehigh Valley had 5 SW7s on the roster, numbers 220 to 224. In 1972, the Lehigh Valley took over the operations of the Central New Jersey Railroad in the state of Pennsylvania, including the large freight yard in Bethlehem. Here we see number 223 in the Bethlehem engine facility. The photograph was taken in 1973. In this April of 1972 photograph, taken in Manville, New Jersey, we see number 224 still wearing its original as-delivered paint scheme. Between September of 1950 and January of 1954, Locomotive produced the 800 horsepower SW8. 306 of these units were built for American railroads, of which 27 went to the Lehigh Valley. They were numbered 250 to 276. 18 of the engines, numbered 256 to 273, were very unusual locomotives in that they were yard switchers delivered with dynamic brakes. In this photograph we see examples of both types of Lehigh Valley's SW8s. The switcher on the left, number 273, is one that has the dynamic brake system. It can be identified by the boxy structure bulging out in front of the cab. This unit housed the resistors and the cooling fan for the dynamic brake system. As the camera pans across the 2 yard switchers, it is apparent that number 255 does not have dynamic brakes. In addition to dynamic brakes, several units also had multiple unit connections and pilot plows. These units were assigned to Hazleton, Pennsylvania. The area around Hazleton was honeycombed with branch lines that served the coal industry. Multiple unit SW8s were assigned to transfer the coal cars from the mines to the main line. In this October of 1974 photograph, we see number 262 leading a pair of SW8s on the Lehigh Valley transfer run to Easton for connection with the Central New Jersey. In this October of 1974 photograph, we see number 273 working the Bethlehem hump. We get a good view of the dynamic brake system. These SW8s were photographed in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania in October of 1974. Number 253 was still wearing its as-delivered paint scheme when it was photographed in Bethlehem in 1973. Dynamic brake equipped number 264 was assigned to Easton, Pennsylvania when this photograph was taken in 1972. In this November of 1973 photograph, we see SW8 number 266 idling in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Number 250 is wearing a fresh coat of paint in this December of 1972 photograph. The Lehigh Valley often used a 3-unit set of SW8s to work the Bethlehem hump. Number 255, wearing the brighter red paint scheme, is part of the trio in this November of 1973 photograph. Locomotives SW9 was a 1200 horsepower yard switcher. 786 were constructed for American railroads between February of 51 and December of 1953, 13 of which were on the Lehigh Valley roster, numbered 280 to 292. SW9 number 291 lays over for the weekend at Bethlehem during May of 1973. Locomotive produced a variation of the SW900, identified as the SW900M, rated at 600 horsepower rather than the 900 horsepower of the SW900. The derated engine was the result of reusing old generators from traded-in SC, SW, and NW locomotives. The Lehigh Valley had 12 SW900Ms on the roster. 3, number 106, 107, and 110, came from rebuilding SW engines, and 9, numbers 120 through 127, and number 130, came from former NW1 switchers. SW900M number 122 idles with sister units at the Bethlehem Engine Facility. In this film clip, shot in the early 1970s, we see This section describes diesel locomotives utilized by the Lehigh Valley in over-the-road freight movements. Like most major Class I railroads, during the early diesel era, Lehigh Valley's over-the-road roster was continuously changing. At first, in its move towards dieselization, new locomotives were joining the roster as quickly as could be delivered. Once dieselization had been achieved and more efficient and higher horsepower locomotives became available, new units were added and older models were traded in or rebuilt. In addition, second-hand locomotives were purchased and engines were traded with other railroads. In order to present a comprehensive review of the Lehigh Valley road diesels, we will look at an all-time roster, placing locomotives in chronological order. Like most Class I railroads, Lehigh Valley's first over-the-road freight diesels were cab units, known by rail fans as covered wagons. The Lehigh Valley was one of 23 railroads that purchased Electromotive's revolutionary 1,350 horsepower FT-type diesel. Lehigh Valley's FTs were delivered in January of 1945 and numbered 500 to 507. There were 4 A units with even numbers and 4 B units with odd numbers. In this illustration showing the Lehigh Valley road switcher roster, we see that the first road switcher was purchased in 1948, a Baldwin DRS 44 1500. Numbered 200, it was the only Baldwin road switcher ever on the Lehigh Valley roster. When the cab unit purchases are superimposed on the road switcher roster, we see the Baldwin was purchased the same year as the Electromotive F3s and the Elco FA and FB1s. In this short movie clip, we see the Baldwin idling in the Sayre, Pennsylvania yard. The Lehigh Valley had 20 F3s numbered 510 to 529. As with the FTs, the even numbers were A units and the odd numbers B units. They joined the roster in November and December of 1948 and remained in revenue service until 1967. In this photograph we see F3A number 512 and F3B number 519 in the engine servicing area at the Sayre, Pennsylvania yard. The photograph was taken in August of 1965. The first Elco over-the-road locomotives purchased were FA1 and FB1 type cab units. 10A units and 10B units joined the roster in 1948. The 1,500 horsepower locomotives were numbered 530 to 549, the even numbers being the A units and the odd numbers being the B units. The next Elco road units to join the roster were four 1,500 horsepower RS2 type road switchers purchased between 1949 and 1950. Also in 1950, two additional RS2s were acquired secondhand from the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. 367 RS2s were built for American railroads. In these October of 1972 photographs and movie clip, we see RS2 number 213 with a local freight. In May of 1950, Elco introduced the 1,600 horsepower RS3. 1,265 were built for American railroads. Two of the RS3s joined the Lehigh Valley roster in November of 1950. Three additional RS3s were acquired from the Penn Central in late 1969 and early 1970. Three Lehigh Valley RS2s, number 210, 211, and 212, were traded for the three Penn Central RS3s. The Lehigh Valley assigned the RS2 numbers 210, 211, and 212 to the new RS3 units. In early 1972, an additional RS3 joined the roster. It was acquired from the Precision Corporation in trade for three Baldwin switchers and $5,000 in cash. It was numbered 219. One of the units received from the Penn Central, number 211, was somewhat unusual because of the oversized short hood, which housed a dynamic brake system. Number 211 received a second life when it was rebuilt by Conrail to a DeWitt Jeep in 1979. 211 survives today at the Rochester and Genesee Valley Railroad Museum, wearing its Lehigh Valley paint scheme, operating with an electromotive prime mover. RS3 number 212 arrives at the Sayre yard with a short freight in November of 1972. After it uncoupled from the freight, we see it entering the Sayre engine facility. A year later, in November of 1973, we once again see number 212, freshly repainted and working the Bethlehem hump. In these next three photographs, we see RS3 number 216. It was one of only two locomotives the Lehigh Valley painted in the broad yellow paint scheme. The photographs were taken in Easton, Pennsylvania in January of 1973. The last photograph in our RS3 series shows number 219, the unit received from the Precision Corporation in 1972. Number 219 was originally purchased by the Tennessee Central Railroad in 1950. It was Tennessee Central number 251. After the Conrail takeover, it remained on the roster as Conrail number 5491. Also in 1950, along with the Alco RS2 and RS3 road switchers, the Lehigh Valley purchased Locomotive F7 cab units. There were 14 F7 units on the Lehigh Valley roster. They were delivered in February of 1950 and January of 1951 and numbered 560 to 571. Once again, as with the FTs and F3s, the even numbers were A units and the odd B units. In this film clip taken in the summer of 1965, we see three Locomotive F7s and an Alco RS11 heading up an eastbound freight in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. In another photograph taken in Sayre, Pennsylvania in 1965, we see two F7s, an A unit and a B unit, waiting for their next assignment. In this black and white photograph, taken in the early 1960s, we see a Locomotive F7 number 574. Number 574 was the last F7 to join the Lehigh Valley roster. It was acquired in January of 1951. It had been in service for more than 10 years, yet it was still wearing its as-delivered paint scheme. In 1951 and 1952, the Lehigh Valley purchased its last cab units, 6 FA2 and 6 FB2 covered wagons from the American Locomotive Company. They were numbered 588 to 592. Once again, the odd numbers being B units, the even numbers being A units. In this photograph, we see FA2 number 586 and a sister unit, both in the as-delivered paint scheme. The next road switchers to join the roster were six 1,800 horsepower Alco RS-11s leased from the Pennsylvania Railroad. 3 years later, in 1960, 4 additional RS-11s were purchased new from the American Locomotive Company. The RS-11s were considered by some to be Alco's first second-generation locomotive. 327 were sold to American railroads between 1956 and 1961. The Lehigh Valley acquired 6 additional RS-11s in November of 1967 through a lease agreement with the Penn Central. These units have been upgraded to 2,000 horsepower. They retained their Penn Central numbers 7640 to 7644 and 7648. Number 403 lays over at the Sayre Engine Facility in this May of 1974 photograph. In this film clip, we see former Pennsylvania RS-11s numbers 7648 and number 7640 being turned on the Bethlehem turntable. After being spun around and serviced, we see the 2 RS-11s awaiting departure with a short freight. In these December of 1973 photographs, we see RS-11 number 7640, one of the leased Penn Central units, coupled together with an early model RS-3, working the Bethlehem hump. In another photograph taken in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania in December of 1973, we see RS-11 number 7642, waiting on the ready track. In this photograph of 7642, taken in the same winter, we see a close-up of the deep notches at the top of the hood. They were design characteristics of the RS-11. Once again, we see number 7642, this time with 2 early model RS-3s, working the Bethlehem hump. RS-11 number 7643, wearing the bright red paint scheme, is seen here as the lead unit on a westbound freight out of Easton, Pennsylvania. The photograph was taken in January of 1973. In this photograph taken in March of 1973, we once again see RS-11 number 7643 idling in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, waiting for its next assignment. Number 7644 idles outside the Bethlehem, Pennsylvania engine house in this December of 1973 photograph. In this summer of 1965 film clip, we see an Alco RS-11 with a low hood and 3 Alco Century 420s running light at Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Lehigh Valley's first electromotive road switchers were 2 1,750 horsepower GP9s numbered 300 and 301. They joined the roster in September and October of 1959. They could be identified as the Lehigh Valley's first second-generation diesels because they were rebuilt from 2 FTs that were traded in, number 500 and number 505. GP9 number 301 and Alco RS3 number 216 were the only 2 units painted with the broad yellow stripe paint scheme. Electromotive introduced the 1800 horsepower GP18 in December of 1959 and built 350 for American railroads before construction ceased in November of 1963. The Lehigh Valley purchased 4 GP18s in 1960. They were numbered 302 to 305. As with the GP9s, they were rebuilt from FTs. In these next two photographs taken in 1973, we see GP18 number 302 and 303 laying over at the Oak Island Engine Facility. GP18 number 304 was involved in a wreck in early 1971. It had its short hood pushed into the cab. It was rebuilt with a chopped nose and ox-yoke air filters by the Illinois Central Paducah shops and returned to the Lehigh Valley for painting. We see it here at Sayre in May of 1974. In 1964, 12 Elco 2,000 horsepower Century 420s, also identified as DL721A, numbered 404 to 415, were added to the Lehigh Valley roster. C420 number 404 is leading a 4-unit lash-up on an eastbound freight out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in February of 1975. Number 404 was the first of the C420s delivered. It joined the roster in November of 1964. C420 number 406 was less than a year old when this photograph was taken in August of 1965. It's at the head end of a 3-unit lash-up, leading a westbound freight out of Sayre, Pennsylvania. We see number 406 again years later, now in the darker red paint scheme. In this summer of 1965 film clip, we see 3 Elco Century 420s and an RS-11 heading a westbound freight out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Number 410 is on the point of a fast freight passing through Manville, New Jersey in this April of 1972 photograph. In this film clip, we see 3 Century 420s and 2 Century 628s heading a westbound freight into Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Century 420 number 413 leads the Apollo piggyback train into Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. In 1965, the Lehigh Valley went back to Elco and purchased 8 2,750 horsepower Century 628s. They were numbered 625 to 632. 2 years later, they acquired 9 additional units second-hand from the Monon Railroad. These were numbered 633 to 641. The Century 628s were the only locomotives delivered in the white and black snowbird paint scheme. Number 634 of Monon heritage and an original delivery number 626 head to the Bethlehem Engine Facility. Number 630 and a sister unit were almost new when photographed in Buffalo, New York in April of 1966. In this April of 1974 photograph, we see number 628 and two sister units waiting to hook up to their westbound freight in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. In this April of 1973 photograph, we again see the Apollo piggyback freight, this time with Snowbird number 632 at the head end. Number 635 arrives at the Sayre Engine Facility during June of 1974. In 1971, the Lehigh Valley went back to Locomotive and purchased four 2,000 horsepower GP38s. They were numbered 310 to 313. GP38 number 310 and a pair of Alco Century 420s rolled through Bound Brook, New Jersey in this November of 1973 photograph. In 1972, the Lehigh Valley purchased its last diesels from Locomotive. There were 12 2,000 horsepower GP38-2s. They were numbered 314 to 325. Almost new GP38-2 number 315 is caught between Easton and Bethlehem in May of 1973. In these next two photographs taken in May of 1974, we see three GP38-2s, number 317, number 315, and number 320, arriving at the Sayre, Pennsylvania engine facility for servicing. Lehigh Valley's last purchase of locomotives before the takeover by Conrail were 12 General Electric U-23Bs. The 2,300 horsepower units were numbered 501 to 512. Number 508 had already been absorbed into the Conrail roster when these photographs were taken in September of 1976. However, it was still wearing its Lehigh Valley number. The sections on Lehigh Valley diesel power will conclude with diesels assigned to passenger operations. The Lehigh Valley was unusual in that it had only one passenger diesel type on its roster, PA-1s from the American Locomotive Company. The Lehigh Valley had 14 Alco PAs, numbered 601 to 614, which joined the roster between March and May of 1948. These locomotives were used to pull such famous trains during the 1950s as the Acer Packer, the Black Diamond, the John Wilkes, and the Maple Leaf, which carried through coaches and sleepers to Toronto, Canada. By the early 1960s, passenger ridership had declined to the point that the Lehigh Valley petitioned the ICC for permission to drop passenger service. In February 1961, the Lehigh Valley became freight only. In this photograph we see PA number 602 still in the original as-delivered paint scheme, coupled with number 604. The black smoke indicates that the Alcos were running full throttle. The Lehigh Valley had 149 diesels on its roster when taken over by Conrail in 1976. Those that were operated by Conrail were repainted, and the Lehigh Valley locomotives were lost to rail history. There are at least 3 diesels that exist today in Lehigh Valley markings. The Rochester and Genesee Valley Railroad Museum operates the former Lehigh Valley RS3 number 211. As noted earlier, the unit was originally built for the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1953. Conrail re-engined the unit in 1979, resulting in the non-Elco 2 short stacks. The United Railroad Historical Society of New Jersey operates an electromotive F7 painted as Lehigh Valley number 578. Although cosmetically Lehigh Valley, the F7 was originally Chicago and Northwestern number 4087C. It is shown here as the lead unit on a Chicago freight. Following the takeover by Conrail, former Lehigh Valley Alco Century 420 number 414 was sold by Conrail to the Delaware and Hudson Railroad. In this photograph we see number 414 still wearing its Lehigh Valley livery except for the DH in the front diamond. Number 414 received a second life when it was purchased by a private owner from the Delaware and Hudson and repainted back into its Lehigh Valley livery. Number 414 is also part of the United Railroad Historical Society of New Jersey. In early 1973, the Lehigh Valley and the Delaware and Hudson started pooling power on their 2 daily trains in each direction between Allentown and Mechanicsville, New York. Usual power on these movements were Alco Century 628s from both roads, as well as U-23Bs, U-30Cs, and U-33Cs from the Delaware and Hudson. Normally, locomotive consists were from one road or the other, but on occasions, as seen in these 2 photographs taken in Allentown, Pennsylvania in May of 1973, power from both roads would be mixed. In these photographs, the first 2 units are from the Lehigh Valley and the trailing locomotive is Delaware and Hudson. In these next 2 photographs, taken in Allentown, Pennsylvania in March of 1975, we see a lash-up of Delaware and Hudson U-23Bs, a more typical arrangement. The Delaware and Hudson renumbered their U-23B locomotives from a 300 series to a 2300 series to avoid numbering conflicts with the Lehigh Valley's 300 series locomotives. Here we see a close-up of number 2301, the lead unit in that 4-unit lash-up. In this photograph, also taken in March of 1975, we see Delaware and Hudson U-33C, number 752, being serviced with Lehigh Valley units at Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. In this movie clip taken in 1975, we see Delaware and Hudson U-30C and 2 Century 628s running light in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.